At Easter dinner, my brother's wife said, "You're not really part of this family. You're just the ATM." Everyone laughed. I didn't. I also didn't pay for their kids' summer camp that year. Suddenly, the ATM jokes weren't funny anymore. At Easter dinner, my brother's wife smiled across the table and said, "You're not really part of this family. You're just the ATM." Everyone laughed. I didn't. That one sentence cleared up something I had been feeling for years but never wanted to admit. In that moment, I realized I wasn't being seen as a son, a brother, or an uncle. I was being treated like a bank account with a chair at the table. Hey everyone! Today's story is about how one family dinner completely changed the way a man saw his role in his own family. For years, he thought he was just being a good brother, helping out when things got tough. But slowly, the help turned into expectation, and the expectation turned into a label, the family ATM. The main person in this story is Jake, 34, who runs a successful commercial HVAC business. He has worked hard, lives reasonably, and has his finances in order. Meanwhile, his older brother, Kevin, followed a more traditional path, got a degree, a corporate job, a big house, and 3 kids. On the outside, everything looked perfect. Inside the family, though, an unhealthy pattern had formed around money and support. This Easter dinner was the moment that pattern finally snapped, because when Jake heard that comment and saw people laugh, something very important clicked in his mind. It was no longer just a casual joke or a light comment. It felt like the truth of how they really saw him, said out loud. And instead of raising his voice or starting an argument, he did something much more powerful. He quietly decided he was done playing that role. But to understand why that one line hit so hard, we need to go back and see how he became the ATM in the first place. So let's rewind a bit. Jake is 34 and owns a commercial HVAC business that he started right out of trade school. While a lot of people his age were just starting their careers, he was already crawling through hot attics, building a client list, and learning how to run a business from the ground up. For years, he worked long days, saved carefully, and kept his lifestyle simple. Because of that discipline, things eventually paid off. He now has a team of technicians working for him and steady contracts with offices in his city. He earns a solid income, drives a 6-year-old truck that runs well, and lives in a modest house that he managed to pay off early. He still brings his own lunch most days and does not chase unnecessary luxuries. His older brother, Kevin, took a different road. Kevin went to college, got a business degree, and landed a middle management job at a regional bank. He married his college girlfriend, Jenna, and they now have 3 kids. They have the classic picture of a perfect family life. A house in a nice neighborhood, a big vehicle, and busy schedules filled with activities. The problem was not that Kevin had a family. The problem was how he handled money. Kevin and Jenna lived close to the edge of their income all the time. The mortgage was high because they wanted the right area. They hired help for cleaning and the lawn, ordered food often, and rarely slowed down their spending. About 7 years before that Easter dinner, Kevin's job situation changed when his department was restructured. He was out of work for a few months, and his savings disappeared quickly. Bills started to pile up, and the house was at real risk. Jake's parents came to him and asked if he could help, just for a short while, until Kevin got back on his feet. Jake agreed without much hesitation. He wrote a large check to cover the mortgage and car payments and told Kevin to pay him back whenever possible, with no interest and no pressure. That was the first big step toward becoming the family ATM. Over the years that followed, more requests appeared. Sometimes it was for medical needs, sometimes for the kids, sometimes for car repairs or holidays. Jake kept saying yes because he cared about his family and wanted his brother's children to be okay. At first, it felt like genuine support, but slowly, the feeling of appreciation started to fade, and something else took its place. As the years went by, the pattern kept repeating. A bill would come up, a payment would be due, or some new opportunity for the kids would appear. And the first thought always seemed to be, Jake can help with that. At first, there were thank you messages and long explanations. Over time, those turned into short texts and casual comments, like it was already decided that Jake would step in. What really started to bother Jake was how the tone shifted. Kevin stopped saying, "Can you help?" and started saying, "Can you handle this?" It no longer sounded like a request. It sounded like a duty he was expected to perform. On top of that, there were little jokes at family gatherings. People would mention how nice it must be for Jake to have extra money without kids. Someone would say he was lucky to have so few responsibilities and so much flexibility. Kevin would laugh and refer to him as the family ATM, like it was a funny nickname. Jake would smile politely and change the subject, but inside, it did not feel funny. He loved his nieces and nephew, and he respected hard work, but he could see the difference in choices. When Kevin bought a brand new, very expensive SUV, nobody asked how that fit their budget. When Jenna shared photos from a beach vacation, nobody wondered how they afforded the trip. Yet, when Jake mentioned he might take a fishing trip to Alaska, his mom gently questioned if that was really necessary, especially when his brother's family might need help soon. The message was subtle but clear. Their spending was normal and unquestioned. His spending, even on something rare and meaningful to him, was seen as optional and secondary to their needs. That quiet double standard is what started to build real resentment. It was not just about the money. It was about being seen as a support system rather than a family member. By the time Easter came around, Jake had already begun to feel that something was unbalanced. He just had not decided what to do about it yet. He was still hoping things would settle down on their own. He did not realize that the next family dinner would force everything into the open. Easter dinner took place at Jake's parents' house. The whole family was there, packed around a long table with the good dishes and a big holiday meal. The kids sat at a smaller table nearby, laughing and playing while the adults talked. On the surface, it looked like a warm, normal family gathering. Jake sat between Kevin and a cousin, directly across from Jenna. The conversation started light, with updates about work, the kids, and little stories from daily life. Jake stayed mostly quiet, listening more than talking, just taking it all in. Halfway through the meal, Jake's mom brought up summer plans. She asked what everyone was thinking of doing once school was out and the weather was warmer. Jake's aunt and uncle mentioned a trip to a ranch, and another relative talked about a cruise. That is when Kevin spoke up about the summer camp. He described it as a special program focused on science and technology, with activities like robotics and coding. He said it was very advanced and really good for the kids' growth. Jenna added that it was expensive, but in her words, worth it for their education. Someone at the table asked how much it cost. Jenna shared the amount in a casual tone, like this kind of price was simply expected for their children. Jake quietly did the math in his head, thinking about the total for all three kids. He also remembered that Kevin had recently asked if he could help with summer activities. Then Jake's dad turned to him and asked if he had any big summer plans of his own. Jake said he might just stay local, work on his house, maybe go fishing nearby. Kevin laughed and made a light comment about Jake's simple plans compared to providing experiences for the next generation. That is when Jenna added the line that changed everything. She looked at Jake and, still smiling, said something along the lines of, "Well, someone has to support these experiences. That is kind of your role, right?" Then she clarified, in a very matter-of-fact tone, that he did not have kids or the same responsibilities, so he was basically the financial helper of the family. She called him the ATM again, but this time it was not just a joke on the side. The table went quiet for a moment. Then a few people let out short laughs. Some smiled awkwardly. Others looked down. But nobody really challenged what she had said. Jake sat there, holding his fork, feeling like he had just been clearly labeled. Jenna quickly added that it was just a joke, and told him not to take it personally. But Jake heard it differently. To him, it sounded like the truth of how they saw him, wrapped in humor so it would be easier to say. He realized that this was not a one-time comment. It was the summary of how things had been for years. So, instead of arguing, he calmly set down his fork and decided it was time to leave. When Jake left his parents' house that evening, he did not slam doors or raise his voice. He simply told his mom he had an early job the next day, said a polite goodbye, and walked out. Kevin followed him to the door, trying to smooth things over by saying Jenna didn't really mean it. He even brought up the camp again, acting as if the support was already decided and just needed a final nod. On the drive home, Jake's mind was surprisingly calm. He replayed the scene, not to get upset, but to understand it. In his head, that one comment fit perfectly into every moment from the past 7 years. All the quiet expectations, all the jokes, all the times his own plans were treated as less important. When he got home, he opened his laptop and pulled up the spreadsheet, where he tracked everything he had given his brother's family. Line by line, he saw the mortgage help, the braces, the car repair, the sports fees, the holiday gifts. The total came out to a very clear number, and he stared at it for a while. It was not a random collection of favors anymore. He added a rough estimate for the summer camp, just to see the full picture. Then he gently highlighted that new line and deleted it. Seeing those numbers disappear from the plan felt like a decision finally being made. The next business day, Jake sent Kevin a short, clear message. He wrote that he would not be contributing to the summer camp this year and wished them all the best with their plans. He did not explain, defend himself, or bring up the Easter comment. He simply stated his decision. Within minutes, Kevin called, but Jake let it go to voicemail. Then Jenna called, her message more emotional, focusing on how excited the kids were and how it would be unfair to take this away from them. Jake listened, but stayed firm. He knew he had never promised anything. Later, Kevin showed up at Jake's house in person, clearly stressed. He pushed again, saying the camp was important for the kids' future and that Jake had always helped before. Jake responded calmly that this time, his answer was no. When Kevin tried to blame everything on hurt feelings from Easter, Jake finally mentioned the deeper issue. He talked about the long history of financial help, the unpaid balance, and how the ATM label showed how they really saw his role. For the first time, he drew a clear line and chose not to step back over it. After that conversation, the family reaction came quickly. The next morning, Jake's mom called, sounding worried and emotional. She said Kevin was very upset and that the kids were already talking about the camp. She asked if Jake could please reconsider for the sake of the family. Jake listened respectfully, then explained that he had been helping for 7 years without seeing any sign of repayment. He said he cared about everyone, but he needed to stop being the automatic solution every time there was a bill. When his mom said that family is more important than money, Jake gently pointed out that people only seemed to call him when money was involved. The line stayed quiet after that. Later, Jake's dad called with a more serious, calm tone. He asked what had changed and why Jake was suddenly taking this stand. Jake explained that nothing sudden had happened. He had simply reached a point where the pattern was too one-sided. He mentioned the expensive car, the vacations, and the summer camp registration that went ahead before any clear agreement from him. His dad tried to argue that Kevin had children and extra costs, but Jake replied that having kids was a choice, and so were their spending habits. He said he would always be open to emotional support and time, but not endless financial help. Jenna tried one more approach by visiting Jake at his workplace with a box of homemade cookies and a prepared speech. She said she was under stress, that her comment at Easter was careless, and that she did not truly mean to hurt him. She focused heavily on the children, saying it would be a shame for them to miss out because of adult tension. Jake stayed calm and professional. He told her the kids were not being punished. They just were not getting an expensive camp paid for by someone outside their household. He even mentioned a free local program with fun activities they could use as an alternative. Then he clearly stated that he was done providing money for their extras. From that point on, everyone knew his answer was final. As that summer unfolded, Jake found himself reflecting deeply on how boundaries can truly reshape a relationship, even a family one. In the past, every time the phone rang or a new request popped up, he'd automatically say yes. It took years, and that single ATM moment, for him to realize how drained and invisible he felt. Setting a boundary isn't about shutting people out, it's about making room for real respect. By saying no to another big request, he wasn't turning his back on his family. He was taking a step to ensure he could show up authentically, without resentment building beneath the surface. He noticed the difference almost immediately. There was more peace in his routine. Instead of waiting for the next call for help, he had time to focus on his own needs and happiness. He also realized how much pressure he'd put on himself to keep everyone else comfortable. even at his own expense. Old patterns were hard to break. Guilt crept in, especially when family members suggested he was being cold. But the truth is, boundaries aren't about being cold. They're about preserving your ability to care for others without sacrificing your own well-being. Jake began to see just how much family roles can become fixed over time. If you're always the giver, it quietly becomes expected. But the healthiest relationships are balanced. Everyone brings what they can, and no one feels obligated to shoulder all the weight alone. Setting boundaries meant Jake could show love more honestly, without feeling like he was losing a piece of himself each time. He learned that respect is a two-way street. When boundaries are honored, it creates stronger connections, built on trust instead of expectation. He looked back at the way things were and realized it wasn't the ATM comment that changed everything. That comment just brought the truth to the surface. Change is uncomfortable, especially for people who are used to one person always saying yes. But as the weeks and months passed, Jake learned that the discomfort was temporary, and the peace he gained was lasting. Jake still cared about his nieces, nephew, and even his brother and sister-in-law. He knew he could help in meaningful ways when he chose to, but that help would come from a place of real generosity, not obligation. By taking care of himself, he made space to rebuild family connections in a healthier, more genuine way. And that leads to the question at the center of this story. When is it right to say enough with family? And how do you know where to draw that line? Jake's story isn't rare. So many people get cast in a role in their family, sometimes for years, before realizing they're allowed to choose something different. Maybe you've been in Jake's shoes, giving and giving until you realized your needs mattered too. Or maybe you've been on the other side, relying on a relative for a little extra support when times were tough. What would you have done if you were Jake? Would you have paid for the camp one more time to keep the peace? Or would you have taken that moment to finally set a boundary? Maybe you would have handled it another way. Had a conversation with your family before things boiled over, or set your expectations much earlier. Every family is different, and there's rarely one right answer. That's why your voice, your experience, can help others who are struggling to find their own balance between helping and holding back. Let's open up the conversation. Do you think Jake waited too long to say no? Was it fair for the responsibility to keep falling on his shoulders? If you could give advice to someone who feels stuck in a similar pattern, what would you tell them about healthy boundaries? Sharing your thoughts doesn't just help Jake or people like him feel less alone, it inspires others to take charge of their own happiness too. If stories like this resonate with you, if you appreciate real-life dilemmas and the ways ordinary people make tough decisions, you're in the right place. On this channel, we talk honestly about what it means to navigate family, friendship, work, and the moments that challenge us most. You'll hear stories of people stepping up, stories of hard goodbyes, and stories of family bonds growing stronger after boundaries are set. Don't forget to leave your perspective in the comments. Your story could be the one someone else needs to hear. And if you want more content about real struggles, big choices, and finding the courage to speak up for yourself, hit subscribe. There are always more stories to explore and new lessons to discover together.